Hello, and welcome to the ANCO online seminar series. This is a series of 3 presentations that are all about the importance of making money. Greed is good, is it? It's not a word that we normally associate with the arts, but I'm going to argue that actually we all have to get a bit greedier if we're going to survive the current economic climate. I'm Gill Thewlis. I've spent the best part of the last 20 years working with arts organisations in a variety of ways, but principally strategically, and the thing I get the biggest buzz out of is seeing them become better businesses. So I just want you to think about something for a minute. This is a continuum. Where do you want to put yourself on this line? At one end, self-sacrificing, at the mercy of society, saint. A lot of organisations have been at this end of the continuum for a long time, but at the moment that's probably a bit precarious. At the other end, profit-orientated, self-interested, we might regard that as perhaps not very attractive, pushing around their large wheelbarrows worth of money. Not many organisations are at that end. Maybe there's a midpoint that's about nurturing your ability to make money whilst not selling out, whilst not losing sight of what you're there to do artistically or socially or creatively. But just think about that. You need to think about where your organisation has been on this continuum, where it should be on this continuum, and you also need to think about where you are personally. Where do you want to be on this continuum, and how comfortable are you about moving backwards and forwards across it? This is really, really important. Not-for-profit doesn't mean make no profit. It means make lots of profit, keep some in reserve, and put the rest to good use. And this underpins all the work that I do with arts organisations and underpins everything we're going to talk about in these 3 sessions. And it's important because who knows what's going to happen in 4 years' time. I want you to imagine for a minute a world with no public funding at all. Local authorities have no money, the Arts Council has no money, there's no public money at all. What will you do? For some organisations, this has already become a reality. For some, it's not yet a reality. Either way, have you and your board thought about this question specifically? Have you come up with a plan as to what you would do if you were going to lose all your public funding? If you haven't, it's a really important question to ask yourselves, and it's an awful lot easier to play this scenario through and plan for it when you're not facing the stark reality of it really happening. So I'd urge you to spend a bit of time just thinking about this. How could you sustain yourself if you were going to lose all of that public money? And so, why do we need to make money? Well, we need to make money in order to be able to protect ourselves against that kind of eventuality. Cash in the bank means that you're artistically and creatively free. You can do what you like if there are no restrictions attached to the cash that you have. It also means, if you've got significant resources, that you are actually able to give stuff away for free and meet your charitable objectives without too much trouble. It also means if you've got buildings and equipment and so on, that you're able to maintain that yourselves without worrying about where you're going to get the money from. And making money allows you to build your reserves to the best level for your organisation. And there's some guidance about that, but every organisation is different, and we're going to come back to that a bit later. It also allows you to self-insure against risk, and this sort of connects to the first thing. If you've got plenty of cash, it means you can afford maybe to make some work that isn't going to attract a huge audience, maybe to do something very experimental, where the point is about taking a risk, and you can take that risk without damaging the organisation. Linked to that is also the more money you've got, the greater control you have over your own destiny. It also means that if something happens, if you lose a piece of business, if something goes a bit wrong, it gives you a breathing space to make sure that you can manage properly. It means you don't have to spend your time firefighting and in crisis management. It also, I believe, gives you the best chance at any future public funding that there might be. So let's just explore that for a minute. I think, this is my personal opinion, I think that the likely reality of a funding-constrained world, or a more constrained funding world than we currently have, is that you'll only get a piece of that constrained funding if your art is exceptional. And I don't think there'll be any compromise about that, because when money is in very short supply, people will have to really distinguish themselves if they're going to get access to any of it. So the quality of the work, whatever the work is, will have to be exceptional. I think also organisations will have to demonstrate that they are already sustaining themselves through other means. I don't think there's going to be public money available to fund core costs of organisations anymore. I think it's all going to be about activity. And thirdly, I think you'll only get money if the activity to be funded contributes something new. Either expands the boundaries of practice, or draws in new sectors of the community, or does something new with an existing community. But it will be all about additionality. But, this is my personal opinion. You might not agree. I also think there's going to be a new kind of convergence in our world. I think that the distinction between subsidised and commercial arts won't remain at the organisational level. I don't think we'll talk about some organisations being in the subsidised sector and some organisations being in the commercial sector. I don't think that distinction will continue. I think the distinction will continue at the activity level. So certain activities will be subsidised. This means that organisations that have traditionally operated entirely in the commercial side of the world might well start to try and access public funding to do specific things. It might actually become more competitive. Because if they are already sustaining themselves commercially, then maybe they're quite a good bet from a funder's point of view. So I think that means, going up to the first point, that successful arts organisations will have to have a mixed economy. Now, quite a lot already do, it depends on your art form, but everybody will have to have a mixed economy. So they'll have some activity that is purely about making money, generating cash. There'll be some activity, as now, which breaks even, project type delivery. And there'll be some activity, having put a load of cash in the bank, that organisations will be able to do without any return at all. The balance between these will depend on the kind of organisation you are and the kind of mixed economy that you need in order to be sustainable. I think in future the funders that have money will be a lot less concerned about how you sustain yourself, as long as you deliver for them. And there are indications that this is sort of starting to happen already, in that the conversations people are having with funders around KPIs and so on are very much about delivery within the context of what's been scoped, rather than the overall activities of the organisation. I think also increasing the profit motive means that for some, being a charity will no longer be the best legal form. Lots of organisations are charities because it was the sensible thing to do when they were created. But social enterprise over the last few years has become a much greater part of the overall economy. And it may be that for quite a lot of organisations, becoming a social enterprise rather than a charity will be the way to go, because there are less restrictions on commercially earned income within a social enterprise environment. I just want to say a bit about reserves. The really important thing is they make you free. Cash in the bank gives you freedom, and if you don't have enough reserves, it constrains your ability to respond. And if you are a charity, the Charities Commission minimum guidance isn't enough unless you're going to close your organisation. If you're intending to survive and thrive, you need to think about reserves in a slightly different way, and you need to think about them in terms of the rhythm of your business and match your reserves targets to that. So, for example, if you're a touring theatre company, an innovative touring theatre company, it might take 18 months from the point that you start to make a piece of work to the point that you end a tour. It might take 6 months to set all of that up. If you lose a tour relatively early in the process, it could take 18 months to rebuild it. If you've only got 4 months core cost cover in your reserves account, you're going to go out of business before you've managed to replace the business that you've lost. In that situation, you might need 18 months core costs as reserves. So think about the rhythm or the rhythms of your business, because many of you have multifaceted businesses. Think about the rhythms of each different bit of your business and think about what you might need to put in place to cover a period where you might lose a piece of funding or you might lose a piece of business, and set your reserves a target according to that. This means, as I've said, that you may need a multiple of your core costs, not a proportion. And it's important to plan for 4 things and think about this in a structured way. And when you make your reserves policy, make specific targets around each of these 4 things to the extent that they're relevant to you. Everybody has working capital requiremts. Everybody has cash flow needs and contingency fund needs. So the first thing is to get your reserves up to a point where you can manage that. The second thing is, many of you may have used funding routes to make new work, to do research and development. I'm not sure it's going to be as readily available in the future. So where you have a requirement to spend money on that kind of activity, you need to make sure that you're accumulating enough profit in order to pay for that. The same goes for capital renewal. Whether you have a building or just a computer system, it's important to make sure that you're retaining enough cash to pay for replacement or renovation or repair. I don't think it's going to be possible to get public funding to pay for your leaky roof anymore. And finally, in terms of major capital projects, I think what's going to happen is that you may still get public money for these things, but the proportion that you have to provide is going to increase. So, missions, models and money have spent a lot of time talking about this. Depending on the kind of organisation you are, it might be sensible to start to think about building an endowment fund to fund things like research and development and make that a long-term strategy. So, sustainability is lots been talked about sustainability, but what does it really mean? I think it means that you have to have at least one of the following 3 to have a remote chance of becoming sustainability. The first thing is, all of you have tangible assets and business assets. Tangible assets might be things like buildings. Business assets are things like the networks, the people that you relate to, your customers, your audiences. Making the most of all of these is going to be quite important. Secondly, if you've been in business for a while, you have a track record and you have some intellectual property. How can you exploit those and leverage value from them? And thirdly, and this is the most important thing, whatever you do, whatever your art form and whatever your service, you're going to have to know that you are giving exceptional experiences and exceptional services to your audiences and your customers. And that includes their experience of you in the round, not just their experience of your art or your product. And the reason this is important is if you sell tickets, if you sell elements of what you deliver, the more excellent it is, the less sensitive people will be about paying for it. But there's some other things that you're going to need as well if you're going to be truly sustainable in this brave new capitalist world. And that is an interest and an ability to engage with the mainstream business community as well as the public, however esoteric your art, and also not just in the dimensions that we're used to thinking of them. So not just in terms of sponsorship or in terms of buying tickets. You're going to have to think about engaging with them in a broader range of ways. It's important to consider other sources of money that do not require a funding application, and maybe change your mindset and philosophy about money. So, for example, if as you're thinking about how you might make money, you come up with an idea that actually requires a bit of investment to get it off the ground and you don't have the cash, if it's a good enough idea, if you can demonstrate that the revenue is going to be strong enough from it, it might be worth borrowing the money. This isn't something that organisations in our sector tend to want to do, but there are a range of financial routes to this which are not about the big four banks on the high street. And it may be that actually just borrowing that little bit of money to get the thing off the ground saves you rather than puts you in a difficult position. And going back to the first point, being prepared to build unusual partnerships, stepping outside your comfort zone, stepping outside your normal thoughts about partnership and thinking about partnering with organisations that you wouldn't otherwise have considered. Maybe purely commercial organisations, maybe in sectors that are not connected to what you're doing, but maybe where you have something to offer. So we're going to come back to that question in the second session. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions at all about what's been said today, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and presentation 2 will follow shortly. Thank you very much.